I-25F grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Big smiles and family photos, an elegant home, carefully curated social media posts. My mother, Linda 50F, made sure of it. She had spent her entire life chasing the image of perfection, making sure everyone saw her as the charming, graceful woman who had everything under control. Behind closed doors, it was a different story. Linda didn't care about being a good mother. She cared about being admired. Everything she did was to impress other people, friends, neighbors, even complete strangers. If an opportunity came up to show off, she grabbed it with both hands. Whether it was hosting expensive dinner parties or acting like a doting mother in public, her goal was always the same: make herself look good. And that meant I had to look good too. I wasn't a daughter to her. I was an extension of her image, an accessory that had to fit into whatever narrative she was selling. She chose my outfits, controlled my hair, even corrected the way I spoke in front of people. There was no room for mistakes, no freedom, just an endless cycle of being paraded around like some perfect little doll. At first, I went along with it, not because I wanted to, but because I knew the consequences. If I smiled, played along, and did everything the right way, things were fine. But if I made her look bad, that's when the mask came off. Linda's anger wasn't loud. She didn't scream or throw things. She was calculated. A quiet, cutting voice that reminded me exactly how much I owed her, how ungrateful I was, how I was ruining her life. I learned early on that fighting back wasn't worth it. But at 16, I snapped. I was tired of being controlled. So I started pushing back, small things at first. I wore clothes she hated. I stopped fixing my hair exactly how she liked. I refused to pose for social media photos. The more I resisted, the tighter she tried to hold on. Her rules became stricter. Her punishments got worse. And the worst part? She didn't just control my actions. She controlled my future. By the time I was 18, I had spent years doing everything around the house, cooking, cleaning, taking care of errands, while she played the role of a perfect hostess. I barely had time to study, let alone think about what I wanted for myself. Then came the breaking point. I had managed to save up for college, working part-time jobs whenever I could. I thought that, for once, I had something that was just mine, something she couldn't take away. I was wrong. Linda sat me down one night, a bright smile on her face, and told me she needed my savings. Not for an emergency, not for another family member, it's for herself. She had some ridiculous excuse, something about a necessary investment to maintain her lifestyle. And just like that, all my hard work, all my sacrifices, meant nothing to her. That's when I knew I would never be more than a tool for her, not a daughter, not a person. So I left. At 19, I packed my things and walked away from the perfect life she had built. She didn't chase after me. She didn't beg me to stay. She just called me dramatic and let me go. I struggled. I had nothing, no financial support, no safety net, no real idea of how to build a life. But for the first time, I was free. I kept my distance after that, low contact, just enough to avoid the endless guilt tripping and manipulation. Every interaction with her was a reminder of why I left. Then, a few years later, she dropped a bombshell. She was getting remarried. Her fiancé, Greg 55M, was exactly the kind of man she'd always dreamed of, a wealthy, well-respected businessman who had no idea who she really was. I wasn't surprised when she invited me to the wedding. I was surprised when she insisted I be the maid of honor. I said no immediately. I didn't want to be part of her fake fairy tale. I didn't want to be dragged back into her world. But Linda knew exactly how to get under my skin. She pulled out every trick she had: family duty, guilt, manipulation. She told me how much it would hurt her if I wasn't there, how people would talk, how selfish I was for refusing. I caved. Biggest mistake of my life. Being the maid of honor didn't just mean standing next to her at the altar. It meant working for her, handling invitations, organizing the seating chart, picking out decorations. The wedding wasn't for Greg. It wasn't even for love. It was another performance, another chance to show off. And I was her unpaid assistant. Every day was another demand, another complaint. I tried to stay out of it as much as possible, just doing the bare minimum. But then, a few weeks before the wedding, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. She was on the phone with a friend, laughing. "I just need Op to play her part," she said. "And then she can go back to whatever life she has." That was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being used. I was disposable. She had never cared about me, not as a daughter, not even as a person. And that's when I knew what I had to do. Linda wanted a perfect wedding? Fine. She was going to get exactly what she deserved. I started planning. I would play along, smile, do everything she asked. And then on the wedding day, when she was standing at the altar, waiting for everything to fall into place, I would disappear. Linda wanted a perfect wedding, a show-stopping, jaw-dropping, envy-inducing event that would have people talking for years. And for the next few weeks, that was all she talked about. I played along, smiled at the dress fittings, nodded at the venue walkthroughs, agreed with whatever ridiculous vision she had for centerpieces and floral arrangements. Every time she looked at me, she saw the obedient, supportive daughter she thought she had manipulated into submission. She had no idea I was counting down the days until I walked away for good. The wedding planning consumed everything. Vendors called at all hours, spreadsheets covered every surface in the house, and invitations became the most important thing in the world. Linda was completely wrapped up in the fantasy, too distracted to notice how I had started pulling away. Small things at first. A few missed calls, an accidental scheduling conflict, emails left unread. I let her frustration build, watching as she scrambled to fix things herself. The workload that had once been dumped on me started shifting back onto her shoulders. I could see the stress wearing on her, but instead of stepping in to help, I just kept smiling, kept playing along. When the wrong set of flowers arrived at the house, she nearly lost her mind. White lilies instead of the pastel roses she had ordered. A disaster, according to her. I apologized, blamed a mix-up with the florist. She spent the entire day arguing over the phone, while I quietly ensured the right flowers would never arrive. Then there was the cake. A simple delivery delay sent her into another meltdown. She called the bakery at least 10 times, demanding answers, threatening to leave bad reviews. I listened from the other room, amused. What she didn't know was that I had emailed the bakery myself the night before, requesting a postponement due to a family emergency. By the time she figured out what was happening, she suspected something was off but couldn't prove it. She accused the vendors of incompetence, the staff of sloppiness, even snapping at me once, but I played innocent. Meanwhile, she flooded social media with updates. The most important day of my life is almost here. Everything has to be perfect. She posted at least 5 times a day. Picture-perfect snapshots of the wedding dress, the venue, the expensive jewelry Greg had bought for her. She called it the start of her happily ever after, but the only thing I saw was a woman obsessed with a fantasy that was about to fall apart. While she was busy chasing likes and comments, I was making adjustments behind the scenes. I had planned everything carefully, but there were close calls. When I tried to send an extra invitation to Greg's ex, the wedding coordinator almost caught the duplicate on the list. I played dumb, pretending it was an accident, and she moved on. One of the decorators backed out. The caterer got their wires crossed and changed a key delivery date. Tiny inconveniences, little things that, on their own, wouldn't have been a big deal. But altogether, it sent Linda spiraling. She kept saying the same thing over and over. Why is this happening to me? Greg's family started noticing. His sister in particular wasn't blind to what was going on. She started side-eyeing the way Linda barked orders at me, how she treated me more like an employee than a daughter. The concerned looks at family dinners turned into actual questions. Does your mom always act like this? Are you sure she's okay? I wasn't the only one seeing cracks in the perfect wedding facade. Rachel, my sister, couldn't care less. She barely paid attention to anything wedding-related and had zero interest in dealing with Linda's breakdowns. As far as she was concerned, things would just magically come together at the last second. Then a week before the wedding, Linda said something that sealed her fate. On another call with a friend, she laughed, completely oblivious that I was in the next room. I just need Op to get me through this wedding. After that, she can go back to whatever sad little life she has. That was it. Not a thank you. Not an ounce of appreciation. Just another reminder that I was nothing but a prop in her perfect performance. The decision to leave was final. The escape plan was simple. The night before the wedding, I would be gone. No explanation, no long goodbye, just silence. And on the day of the wedding, right before she walked down the aisle, she would receive one last message from me. A short note, delivered at just the right moment. Now you know what it feels like to be left behind. The wedding morning arrived, but I was already gone. No goodbyes, no explanations, just silence. My phone was off. My social media was deactivated. There was no way for Linda to reach me. No last-minute pleading, no guilt-tripping texts. She had spent months forcing me into her perfect fantasy, but today she would face reality. At first, she didn't notice. She was too busy barking orders, making sure the photographers captured every candid moment, obsessing over the dress, the flowers, the lighting. Everything had to be flawless. Rachel, barely awake, scrolled through her phone while half listening to Linda's nonstop monologue about how today was the most important day of her life. Guests were already arriving at the venue. The makeup artist was late. The hairstylist was working twice as fast to make up for it. The energy in the bridal suite was tense. But Linda, too excited about her grand entrance, didn't care. Then someone realized I wasn't there. The wedding coordinator hesitated before asking where I was. Linda waved it off. She's probably running late. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Rachel checked her phone. No messages from me. No missed calls. The makeup artist was finishing up. The photographer was taking staged pictures of Linda holding her bouquet. The officiant peeked in, asking if everything was on schedule. Someone checked my dressing room. Empty. The silence stretched. People started looking at each other. The wedding coordinator hesitated before handing Linda a small white envelope. It had my name on it. Still convinced it was something minor, she barely looked at it before tearing it open. Then she read the words inside. Now you know what it feels like to be left behind. The scream that followed was instant, loud enough that even the guests outside could hear it. Everything in the room stopped. The photographer lowered his camera. The hairstylist froze. Rachel turned her head so fast she nearly dropped her phone. Linda's hands shook as she read the note again, as if the words would change. Then in a sudden rage, she crumpled the paper and threw it to the floor, knocking over a glass of champagne in the process. How could she do this to me? The bridal suite was silent, except for the sound of her heavy breathing. Outside, the guests were still settling into their seats. Some had already noticed the commotion from inside. The murmur of confused whispers started spreading. Rachel moved first, bending down to grab the discarded note. She read it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to something unreadable. But Linda wasn't paying attention to her. She was storming toward the exit, dress dragging behind her, veil slightly crooked from the sudden movement. She flung open the doors, stepping outside where dozens of guests and Greg's entire family were waiting. The moment they saw her red face and wild expression, the quiet whispers turned into full-on murmurs. Then, like clockwork, Linda turned on the waterworks. Loud, dramatic sobbing, hands over her face, full body shaking. People started pulling out their phones. Rachel, realizing how bad this was getting, stepped forward, trying to talk to her, but Linda wasn't listening. She turned toward Greg, tears running down her perfectly done makeup. Greg, who had already been watching the entire scene unfold, looked exhausted rather than shocked. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicking between Linda, the guests, and his visibly uncomfortable family. Finally, he let out a sigh. I should have listened when my sister warned me about this, he said, shaking his head. This is exactly why Oppie left. Dead silence. Linda blinked rapidly like she had just been slapped. Greg kept going. This wedding isn't about us. It's about you. It's always been about you. Gasps. A few guests shifted in their seats. Someone in the back muttered, yikes. Greg's sister, who had been eyeing Linda with suspicion for weeks, stood up from her chair. She leaned in and whispered something to him. He nodded once. Then, in front of everyone, Greg took a deep breath, turned back to Linda, and said, I can't marry you. The reaction was immediate. Linda's hands dropped from her face. Her mouth opened and closed, like she couldn't process what she had just heard. Then, just as quickly, the tears disappeared, replaced by full-blown rage. "You're ruining my life." She spun in a full circle, looking for anyone, to back her up. The guests avoided her gaze. A few of them had their phones raised, filming. Rachel took a step back. Greg's parents stood up, his father shaking his head in disappointment. And Greg? He had already started walking away. Linda reached out, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him back. He barely looked at her as he shook her off. Then just like that, he was gone. A few guests followed his lead, awkwardly slipping out of their chairs and heading toward the exit. Linda screamed after them, her voice hoarse, demanding they stay, that they fix this. No one did. One by one, people left. The caterers packed up. The band, who had just started setting up their equipment, exchanged awkward glances before quickly disassembling everything. By the time the wedding planner hesitantly approached, asking if she still wanted to go through with the reception, there was barely anyone left to attend. And for the first time in her life, Linda had no one to perform for, no one to impress, no one to control. Just an empty aisle, an abandoned altar, and the last remnants of a perfect day that never happened. Greg's family was done. They had seen enough at the wedding to make up their minds. His parents, who had been polite but distant before, immediately cut contact. His sister, who had been skeptical from the start, deleted Linda from social media and made it clear she wanted nothing to do with the mess. Even distant cousins who barely knew Linda removed themselves from the disaster. The wedding guests weren't far behind. Someone had been filming when Linda stormed out in tears, and by the next day, the clip had been shared in multiple private group chats. "This is the woman who tried to scam my brother," Greg's sister posted, adding fuel to the fire. Whispers about her behavior spread among extended family, turning into full-blown conversations. The perfect image she had spent years building was collapsing in real time. Rachel, usually indifferent, took one look at the fallout and quietly started distancing herself. She avoided phone calls, skipped family gatherings, and ignored Linda's desperate attempts to talk. Being associated with her was now an embarrassment. Meanwhile, my phone blew up. When I finally turned it back on, I had dozens of messages waiting. Some were furious, mostly from Linda. Others were pure shock, demanding to know if I really left in the middle of her wedding. And then there were the best ones, the ones cheering me on, calling it the most satisfying karma they'd ever seen. My aunt was the first to give me a full recap. She wasted no time, breaking down every chaotic detail. Linda's screaming fit, the way Greg had calmly walked out, leaving her standing there like a fool. The guests quietly slipping away, some muttering that they should have seen this coming. The venue almost shutting the whole event down because Linda was too hysterical to make a decision. By the time my aunt was done, I was sitting there, picturing every moment. And then, 48 hours later, Greg sent the final blow. Single text. "I can't do this anymore. We're done." Linda spiraled. She called him nonstop, leaving voicemail after voicemail. She sent long-winded messages about how he was making a mistake, how she had just been stressed and wasn't thinking clearly. Greg never responded. The victim act started immediately. She tried to spin the story, telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined her wedding, that Greg had been manipulated into leaving her, but it was all some elaborate scheme to destroy her happiness. Nobody bought it. Extended family started speaking up, people who had seen the cracks long before this disaster. A few aunts and uncles shared stories about Linda's controlling ways, how she had treated me like an accessory, how she had always been obsessed with appearances. She had no defense. With Greg gone, Rachel avoiding her, and me completely out of her life, the realization hit her. She had finally lost control. Meanwhile, I was living my best life. Greg wasn't just done with Linda, he wanted his money back. After the disaster that was supposed to be his wedding, he took a few days to process everything. Then once the shock wore off, reality set in. Tens of thousands of dollars had gone into planning a wedding that never happened. Venue deposits, catering, decorations, entertainment, every detail had been paid for out of his pocket, and he wasn't going to let it slide. A week after the failed wedding, Linda received a formal letter from Greg's lawyer. It was short and to the point. Greg expected full reimbursement for every cent he had spent. If she didn't pay voluntarily, he would take legal action. Linda panicked. She tried to argue that it wasn't fair, that Greg was being cruel for punishing her over one bad day. She blamed the stress, the pressure, the unforeseen circumstances. But Greg wasn't responding to her directly anymore. Everything went through his lawyer. That's when the harassment started. Linda called Greg repeatedly, leaving long, emotional voicemails. She sent texts, emails, even handwritten letters, begging for a second chance. She promised things would be different. She swore she had just been overwhelmed and that they could still fix things. Greg blocked her on everything. That's when she turned to Rachel. She tried to guilt trip her into talking some sense into Greg. When Rachel ignored her, the messages got more desperate, then angry. She called her ungrateful, accused her of betraying her own mother. But Rachel wasn't interested. She had seen enough at the wedding to know it was better to walk away. So Linda did what she always did when she felt backed into a corner. She blamed me. A long, dramatic email showed up in my inbox. Paragraph after paragraph about how I had ruined her future. If I had just played along, none of this would have happened. Greg wouldn't have left. The guests wouldn't have abandoned her. Her reputation wouldn't be in shambles. She demanded that I fix this mess. I deleted it without replying. Meanwhile, Greg's lawyer wasn't playing around. A second letter arrived, this time with an official warning, pay up, or the lawsuit moves forward. Linda knew she was in trouble now. She made one last desperate attempt to avoid it. A carefully worded apology letter arrived at Greg's office. Unlike the emotional messages she had sent before, this one was polished, rehearsed. She took responsibility, admitted she had let stress get the best of her, and even promised to seek help to be a better person. Greg never responded. His lawyer did. Prepare for court. I didn't even have to do anything.
Oh.
The drama unfolded all on its own. Every few days I got updates from family members. Some thought it was hilarious. Others were just watching the disaster play out from a safe distance. And me? I was just sitting back, enjoying the show. The legal process dragged on for months, but the outcome was never in doubt. Greg had the receipts, the records, and the patience to see it through. Linda, on the other hand, had nothing to stand on. No excuses, no way to twist the narrative. She had promised him a perfect wedding, spent his money like it was an unlimited resource, and then humiliated herself in front of his entire family. The court had no sympathy. The ruling came down. Linda was required to pay back a large portion of what Greg had spent on the wedding. That's when the real panic set in. She had lived her entire life pretending to be wealthier than she actually was. She threw extravagant parties, wore designer clothes, and always had to be the most impressive person in the room. But it was all smoke and mirrors. With Greg gone and no one left to foot the bill, she was drowning. She started selling things off. Jewelry, furniture, even some of the gifts she had received for the wedding that never happened. Family members whispered about how she had called them, casually asking for loans, but no one wanted to help. Then one day, my aunt called me, barely able to get the words out through her laughter. Linda had sold her car. Not by choice, she had to. It was either that or defaulting on another payment she couldn't afford. It wasn't just her car, either. She was downsizing everything, trying to scrape together enough money to avoid complete financial collapse. The woman who had spent years flaunting her perfect life was now selling handbags online just to stay afloat. And Greg? He was already gone. As soon as the court ruled in his favor, he disappeared from her life completely. No calls, no messages. He wasn't interested in her apologies or explanations. That's when it hit her. The money was one thing. The public humiliation was bad enough. But the real punishment? Silence. No more control. No more influence. No one left to manipulate. She tried reaching out to Rachel, but got nothing in return. Even her last loyal supporter had walked away. Rachel had been keeping her distance, but even she couldn't ignore what was happening. A few days after the lawsuit, she messaged me. Mom's been calling me nonstop. She's losing everything. I figured you'd want to know. I just smiled. There was nothing left to say. The best revenge wasn't some big dramatic moment. It wasn't fighting back or dragging things out. It was moving on. And that's exactly what I did.